Well, it's special treat time once again on the Atheist Forum. Tonight we're going to play a DVD from the Atheist Alliance Convention, which we shot in September up in Arlington, Virginia. Before I tell you about the DVD, I just want to mention briefly that starting next week, we will be moving to channel 950 if you're on the Bright House network. So if you're a Bright House subscriber and you are one of our legion of fans of the Atheist Forum, you'll need to look for us on channel 950 on Bright House. For other cable systems, we'll still be right on the same channel that we've always been located on. So much for that little piece of business. I want to talk about the DVD we're going to play tonight. It's a really amazing woman. Speaking runs about 50-some minutes. We're talking about a woman by the name of Ayaan Hirsi Ali. First gained notoriety for a film called Submission that she made with a gentleman named Theo van Gogh. He was murdered on a public street in Amsterdam by a devout Muslim, stabbed several times, shot, tried to decapitate him. Left sticking in his chest was a note saying that Ayaan Hirsi Ali would be next to be murdered for having insulted Islam. Her book, Infidel, is in the top 10 bestseller lists for nonfiction. She has a fatwa on her head. Requires 24-hour security and basically is almost a prisoner in her own home. But she is a very brave woman, and her story is very fascinating. So I think that for those of you who are interested in the subject of religion, who are interested in what it's like to grow up in an Islamic society, what it's like to break away from an Islamic society and to declare yourself a non-believer, an open atheist, and to then be subject to constant death threats and the threat of constant death, that you will find this a very fascinating DVD. So without further ado, and we will roll the DVD, please enjoy it, and I look forward to talking to you again in about an hour.
George Orwell began his fine essay, Shooting an Elephant, by describing the first time in his life he had been important enough to be hated by large groups of people. By that criterion, nobody here is more important than our next speaker, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. It is one thing to be disliked by religious extremists, as most of us are, but quite another to be under a constant threat of death through fatwas. To the disgust of many Muslim fanatics, Hirsi Ali produced a film called Submission about domestic violence by Muslim men against Muslim women. She courageously refused to submit to Islamic abuses or be silent about them. She has received numerous awards for her human rights work, and in 2005 was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. We may all be infidels of one sort or another, but there is only one person in this room who could write the book about being an infidel. And a fascinating book it is, a compelling personal story of childhood horrors and repression, and the courage it took for her to break away from the world of faith to enter the world of reason and publicly embrace atheism. It is my pleasure to present Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Oh my goodness, this is so intimidating. I was asked to speak to you about a journey from the world of faith to the world of reason. It is a personal story, and it's subjective. On a social and cultural level, such a journey can be very long, taking many hundreds of years, and for an individual, it may last a span of moments, the time for one object to collide with another, one world with another. As is natural, I have been shaped by the context of my life, so I must speak to you from this context and tell you something of that life. I was brought up a Sunni Muslim, not a Shia or a Baha'i, an Ahmadiyya or an Ismaili or a Sufi, not a Christian or a Buddhist, Hindu or Jain. I am from Somalia. Not Yemen, Morocco, Mexico or Japan. I come from a specific time and place, and I landed in a specific time and place, and that's the story I'm going to tell you. And by doing so, I hope to illustrate the difference between a state of mind of faith and that of reason, and what it may mean for one individual to travel across that divide. I was born 37 years ago in Somalia. I was raised by my mother and grandmother. My father was largely absent. Polygamy is an accepted part of Somalia and of the Islamic faith. My father's first wife, Mariam, gave him a daughter, Arro, about 4 years before he married my mother. My father did not tell Mariam he had married again until my mother had 2 children already, my older brother Mahat and myself. Mariam was studying in the United States at the time, at Columbia University in New York. When Mariam returned to Mogadishu and discovered that my father had another wife, she was already pregnant with her second daughter, my half-sister Ichabo. Although taking a second wife is quite customary in the society in which she had been raised, Mariam had been exposed to Western ideas, and she no longer embraced this custom. She was outraged and gave my father an ultimatum. She told him to choose. It goes against common decency within my clan, the Darod, and against Islamic law for a man to divorce a pregnant woman. So my father waited until Ichabo was born and then gave Mariam the answer she dreaded. He divorced her. During this time, the young nation of Somalia was taken over by a young sergeant in the army, Siad Barre, who established a dictatorship my father did not support. My father was jailed for years for his political activities in defiance of this dictator, and his escape from jail came through the aid of a clan member who was later killed for his part in the escape. When I was 8 years old, my mother smuggled Mahat, me, and our little sister Hawa out of Somalia into Saudi Arabia. There, we girls had to live behind closed doors at all times, unless my brother or father could accompany us out of the house. In fact, when we first arrived in the country, my father was not there to fetch us from the airport, and as a woman, my mother did not have the right to move about the city by herself. We were stranded there until finally a male clan member came to rescue us. In school in Saudi Arabia, the teacher called me a slave because I was black and taught that Jews were evil and conspired against good Muslims. After a year, we were deported from Saudi Arabia, fortunately, because of my father's continuing political activities. For a little over a year, we lived in Ethiopia at the headquarters of the exile army in which my father was a leading organizer. When I was 11, my father moved us to Kenya, where he soon left us once again. This time, I did not see him almost for a decade. It was in a Somali community in Kenya that I lived until I was 23. My mother brought us up very strictly. Being a good Muslim girl really boiled down to 2 ideals: obedience and chastity. We were supposed to submit to her, to our brother, and to our elders in the clan. We were not supposed to have any independent or impure thoughts. My mother didn't want my sister Hawa and me to go to school, but fortunately my father insisted. So it was that we learned English, and so it was that we entered the world of books. These were not classics or literary masterpieces. They were Nancy Drew adventures and slashy romance novels. The kind of thing teenage girls like to read. But they were my first glimpses of a foreign world, one where girls like me were free to make their own choices. In a conflicting parallel, I was a devout Muslim. When I was 16, I chose to wear a full hijab. I was one of the first girls in my school to go about with my body and hair completely hidden in a black veil, with only my face showing. I was quite proud of the fact. I embraced the puritanical interpretation of Islam as we had practiced in Saudi Arabia. I went to lectures and joined youth religious groups and was enamored of the nascent movement of the Muslim Brotherhood. I saw in this a way to be good, to be pure, to have order and consistency in my life. My personal expression of faith was one of the few choices I had, one of the few places where I was free to search for a personal identity. Paradoxically, the expression I was choosing required me to efface more and more of myself, to submit my will completely, to hand my life and my destiny over to Islam, Muhammad and Allah. In retrospect, I think that while I welcomed the challenge of attaining purity, my mind rebelled against the submission in spite of myself. Already the world of faith and the world of reason were at war within me. When I was older, I returned to Somalia with my sister, Hawa. Soon we were followed by large portions of the Somali people. The civil war in Somalia had been growing for decades, and about 2 weeks after we arrived, all hell broke loose. There was open warfare around the Somali capital, Mogadishu. Siad Barre was evicted, an event we all welcomed. But then the southern Hawiye clans began a violent campaign to cleanse all foreign elements from Mogadishu and Hawiye lands. Foreign meant my clan, the Darod, originally from northern Somalia. Some Darod fled the city. Others fought back, using tactics just as brutal as the Hawiye. The Hawiye themselves were divided. The Abgal subclan followed Ali Mahdi, and the Habargadir subclan were loyal to Aidid. Meanwhile, the Isaq in the north developed a taste for ethnic cleansing and internecide warfare, and the Darod too fought among themselves and with the Isaq. American soldiers were sent into this mayhem in 1993, and the world got to see exactly what a tribal, clan-based society can become. Millions of Somalis have been displaced since then, tens of thousands killed, wounded, and starved to death. Where there is no reasonable shared discourse, no community of values, where the individual is not respected just for the sake of it, then the common currency of power becomes violence. At the time, growing within this chaos and alongside the clan divisions was a group of Islamic radicals. These men were trained in Quranic schools in Saudi Arabia and funded by Wahhabi money. They sought to impose Sharia or Islamic rule on Somalis who could not afford to flee. In the strife, violence and terror of Somalia, this movement took root, and today, my motherland is torn by anarchy and fundamentalist Islam. Well,